Imagine waking up one morning and the country you live in just doesn't exist anymore. No war destroyed it, no earthquake swallowed it, no alien invasion, unfortunately. That would have been a much more interesting story. It just collapsed from the inside. One of the most powerful countries in human history, gone in just a few years. That country was the Soviet Union. Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Here we learn new ideas and improve our English at the same time through stories. You practice English without feeling like you're studying. So here is what we are going to cover today. You are going to understand what the Soviet Union actually was, because a lot of people have heard the name but are not totally sure what it means. You are going to see what daily life looked like for ordinary people living inside it. You are going to feel the tension, the fear, the pride, and the strange atmosphere of that era. And then you are going to watch it all fall apart and understand why. By the end of this, you will have a much clearer picture, not just of history, but of how powerful systems rise and how even the most powerful ones can break. Let's get into it. So first, what even was the Soviet Union? The full name was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which is a mouthful, so most people just said the USSR, or the Soviet Union. It was not just one country the way France or Japan is one country. It was actually 15 different republics joined together under one government. Huge ones like Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan. Smaller ones like Estonia, Armenia, and Georgia. All of them under one roof, one system, one flag. At its biggest, the Soviet Union covered about 1/6 of all the land on Earth. Let that sit for a second. 1/6. It stretched across 11 time zones. When people in the west of the country were eating breakfast, people in the east were already going to sleep. It was genuinely enormous. And the system running all of this was communism. Now that word gets used a lot, so let's just explain it simply. The basic idea of communism is that everything belongs to everyone equally. No private companies, no individual owners. The government controls the farms, the factories, the housing, the hospitals, everything. The idea sounds fair on paper. In practice, as you will see, it got very complicated very fast. The Soviet Union was born in 1922 after a revolution took down the old Russian Empire, and it lasted until 1991. 69 years. That is longer than most people's lives. Now, let's talk about what life actually looked like inside this place, because this is where it gets interesting. If you were an ordinary Soviet citizen, your life looked quite different from what most of us know today. You did not choose your job the way people do now. The government decided what the economy needed and assigned roles accordingly. You might become an engineer, a factory worker, a teacher, a scientist. Not always because you chose it, but because the system needed it. Housing was provided by the state. You did not go apartment hunting and compare prices online. The government gave you a place to live. Many families lived in what were called kommunalkas, shared apartments, where several families shared one kitchen and one bathroom. Imagine sharing your kitchen with 2 or 3 other families every single morning, every day, for years. You would either become very close friends or learn to avoid eye contact extremely well. Shopping was also different. There were state stores, but the shelves were often half empty. Sometimes you would walk in and find bread, sometimes potatoes, sometimes almost nothing. People would stand in long lines for basic things. And when a line formed, People joined it first and asked what it was for second. Because if there was a line, something was available, and something available was worth waiting for. But here's the thing that surprises a lot of people. Life was not miserable for everyone all the time. Many Soviet people remember their childhoods warmly. Free education, free healthcare, job security, a sense of community. Nobody was getting extremely rich, but nobody was sleeping on the street either. It was a different kind of normal. And people adapted to their normal, just like people everywhere always do. But underneath that normal, there was something else, something quieter and a little darker. The Soviet government was not just running an economy. It was watching its people. There was a secret police organization called the KGB, and their job was to make sure nobody was speaking against the government, organizing against it, or even thinking too loudly about it. You had to be careful what you said, even at home, even with friends, because anyone could report you, a neighbor, a coworker, sometimes even a family member, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. The system created an atmosphere where trust was complicated, where you smiled at someone and wondered at the same time. People who spoke against a government could be arrested, sent to labor camps in Siberia. Siberia, by the way, is extremely cold. This was not an accident. It was a message. And then there was the Cold War. This was not a war with battles and bombs, at least not directly. It was a long, tense standoff between the Soviet Union and the United States. Two enormous powers, both with nuclear weapons, both watching each other extremely carefully, both trying to prove that their system was better. It lasted for decades, and the whole world felt it. Children in American schools practiced hiding under their desks in case of a nuclear attack. Soviet citizens were told that America wanted to destroy them. Both sides were genuinely afraid of each other. The tension was real. The weapons were real. And the strange thing is, both sides somehow managed to never actually use them, which, when you think about it, is either very wise or very lucky. Possibly both. But here is something that often gets forgotten when people talk about the Soviet Union. It was also, in many ways, genuinely impressive. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik into space, the first human-made object ever to orbit the Earth. People looked up at the night sky and saw this little light moving across the stars and could not quite believe it was real. Then, in 1961, they sent Yuri Gagarin into space, the first human being to leave this planet and come back alive. He was 27 years old. He smiled in every photograph. The whole country was proud, genuinely, deeply proud. The Soviet Union built massive infrastructure, enormous dams, railways cutting across thousands of kilometers of wild land, cities built from nothing in the middle of frozen terrain. Their scientists were world-class. Their mathematicians, their chess players, their athletes, consistently among the best in the world. There was real pride, not manufactured, not fake, real pride. People believed in what they were building, or at least many of them did. They believed they were part of something bigger than themselves. And that feeling, that sense of collective purpose, was powerful. But systems, no matter how powerful, can carry problems inside them for only so long. By the 1970s and into the 1980s, things were quietly going wrong. The economy was not growing the way it needed to. The government was spending enormous amounts of money on the military, on weapons, on the space race, on maintaining control over a massive empire. And ordinary life was not improving the way people had been promised it would. There was also something called corruption. Officials who were supposed to serve the public were quietly serving themselves, getting better apartments, better food, better access, while regular people stood in lines. People could see it. They were not stupid. And slowly, the gap between what the government said and what people actually experienced every day grew wider and wider. Then in 1986, a nuclear reactor at a place called Chernobyl exploded in Ukraine. The government tried to control the information, tried to minimize what had happened, tried to manage the story. But the truth leaked out. It always does. And for many Soviet citizens, Chernobyl became a symbol of something they had been quietly feeling for years. That the system was not as strong as it looked. That behind the confident announcements and the military parades, something was cracking. A man named Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union in 1985. He was different from the leaders before him. He could see the problems clearly, and he wanted to fix them. He introduced two big ideas, glasnost, which means openness, and perestroika, which means restructuring. The idea was to make the system more transparent, more flexible, more honest, allow people to speak more freely, reduce some of the control, fix what was broken. But here is the thing about loosening control over a system that was held together by control. Once you open the door a little, it is very hard to decide how far it opens. People who had been quiet for decades suddenly had a voice, and they had a lot to say. The 15 republics that made up the Soviet Union started demanding independence, one by one. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, then others, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia. They had their own languages, their own cultures, their own histories that had been folded into this larger Soviet identity, and now they wanted those identities back. Gorbachev tried to hold it together, but the momentum was too strong. In August 1991, there was even an attempted coup, a group of hardliners who wanted to reverse everything and go back to the old way. It failed, but it made everything more unstable. And then, on the 25th of December 1991, Gorbachev went on television and resigned. The Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin for the last time. And just like that, the Soviet Union was gone. 69 years, 15 countries, hundreds of millions of people, gone, not with a bang, but with a quiet, exhausted ending. And then came the morning after. 15 new independent countries woke up and had to figure out what they were. Russia was the largest and the most powerful, but even Russia was suddenly a very different place. The old system was gone. Now what? Markets opened. Private businesses appeared. For the first time, people could own things, start companies, make money in ways that had never been possible before. For some people, this was exciting. For others, it was terrifying. Most had never lived in any other system. The rules had changed completely overnight, and nobody gave them a manual. The 1990s in Russia and many former Soviet states were genuinely chaotic. Prices went crazy. Savings that families had kept for decades became almost worthless, almost overnight. Organized crime grew. Unemployment grew. Life expectancy actually went down in some places. Real people, regular people, lost their footing completely. And many older people, the ones who remembered the Soviet era, started to feel something complicated. Not exactly that they wanted the Soviet Union back, but a kind of grief for the certainty it gave them, for the stability, for knowing what tomorrow would look like, even if today was not perfect. That feeling even has a name. In Russian, there is a word, nostalgia. But the specific kind of nostalgia for the Soviet past is sometimes called ostalgie in some former Soviet countries, a longing not necessarily for the politics, but for the feeling of a world that made sense. So, what do we take from all of this? The Soviet Union was not simply good or simply evil. It was enormous and complicated and human. It had real achievements and real cruelties, real pride and real fear, real community and real loneliness, all at the same time. What makes it so fascinating is that it actually happened. This was not a story someone invented. Hundreds of millions of real people lived inside this system, fell in love inside it, raised children inside it, dreamed inside it. And then one day it was gone and they had to keep living. History is full of things that felt permanent right up until the moment they weren't. And maybe that is the quiet lesson here. Not that the Soviet Union was good or bad, but that even the biggest, most powerful, most certain-looking things in the world are still made by people. And anything made by people can change. Sometimes slowly, sometimes surprisingly fast. Thanks for listening today. If you learned something new, or if something surprised you, let me know in the comments. I actually really enjoy reading what you think. And if you want more stories like this one, stick around. There are more coming. See you in the next one.